Rosemarie Short has had a difficult journey with endometriosis. She very kindly agreed to share her story with me.
If you want to share your story and like your personal experience kind of from diagnosis to kind of how you've got to here.
Yeah, so I noticed like when I was very young, when I started getting periods, that they were like incredibly painful, and I just assumed that was what periods were like. And then all the way through like school, I would often be like, how are all these girls not like doubled over in pain all of the time? What's their like secret to not be like showing how bad it is? And this was like showing my age, this is like 15-20 years ago now, so the conversation around like talking about periods and women's health was not the same as it is now. Even amongst like my friends, we didn't really talk about that kind of stuff. So I just had no idea that what I was experiencing was not what everyone else was experiencing. And I got to, I think I'd even left college and I was studying and working at the same time, and I was talking to a colleague and she said to me like, that's not normal, like what's wrong with you? Because I was like, I think I need to go home. I was getting like cold sweats because the pain was so bad, feeling dizzy. And that was the point, I think, at which I was like, maybe I should research this. And somehow I'd never Googled it, never thought to like look into it at all. So I did a bit of research and then the word endometriosis came up, and that was what motivated me to like go and visit my GP for the first time, the first of many visits. I was kind of like a textbook. I think it actually did take me 8 years from like the first visit to getting the diagnosis through having a laparoscopy. And my GP was very sympathetic, and for me it wasn't the interactions with my GP that were the problem. It was one that, you know, there is no cure and it's all about masking symptoms. So all of the things I was being offered were kind of experimenting to see if anything could make the pain more bearable. So I went on the mini pill quite early on and then got like sent to various consultants. And it was actually with consultants that I had like really bad experiences. And the first time I went to a consultant, it was a male consultant at a hospital, and pretty much the first thing he said to me is like, oh, when you get pregnant, it won't like matter anymore, you'll be fine. And I just kind of looked at him like, I think I was 22, and I was like, oh, that's not helpful to me at all. Between the first consultant appointment and the consultant who finally referred me for the laparoscopy, I saw maybe 5 or 6 consultants over years. And they would all advise different things. So like I had to go for like, one consultant referred me to like a bowel consultant and gave me somatogyoscopy, which was like completely unnecessary treatment to see if it was a bowel issue, when I know, my GP know, everyone knew it was not an issue, but I think they were just kind of like throwing darts at a dartboard to see what would stick. And then once I had the laparoscopy on the day I had it, the consultant came in and said, oh, we'd like to give you the Mirena coil while we're doing it, but I had no like consultation with that beforehand or discussion, so I refused it on the day because I didn't feel I'd had enough time to like research and process what that would mean. And then since then it's been a lot of different pills, painkillers, more pressure to have the coil, which, you know, has pros and cons to it. Career-wise, it has been difficult because, you know, I'm in pain most of the time, I would say, and sometimes it's like really bearable and I can get on with it. Sometimes there's a flare-up and it's really difficult, and you have to take sick leave sometimes for that. And obviously you don't want to be taking lots of sick leave, it can have repercussions, and I've had to have conversations with managers about something which is quite private to be able to help them to understand that I need reasonable adjustments for when I'm not feeling well. But I've been quite lucky. I think I've had quite supportive line managers who've made those adjustments for me and made me feel empowered to be able to speak up and talk to others about it. In terms of personal relationships, it is hard. It's a demanding illness, I would say, and like things like sex can be really like painful if you're having a flare-up, and that can be difficult in a relationship, and having to explain a lot about exhaustion and brain fog and, you know, body aches and all that kind of stuff. It can make you feel kind of like othered in your relationship because you're kind of viewing yourself through your illness, and talking and arranging things through your illness. And with friends as well, like outside of like romantic relationships with friends, you know, having a flare up and having to cancel plans or change plans at the last minute and feeling flaky can like really impact your well-being and your mental health, I think. I feel like when you've got endometriosis, you become a little bit cynical about new treatments and things, and I certainly feel like people often say to me, have you tried X, have you tried Z? And people are just trying to be helpful, but you sort of feel like you don't want to constantly be relying on different medications, constantly being told, you know, if you tried this, it would be better. I remember ever menstrual health ever being discussed. I remember like safe sex being discussed at school, but there was never any expansion beyond that. And at home, I have 4 brothers, so we weren't like a household that talked about girly things, so I didn't get that kind of interaction to talk about my like periods or my menstrual health or anything like that at home. At that time at school, it wasn't something like, it was kind of taboo, I guess, to talk about periods, so I very much like went into my adult life never really having those conversations, and I think that's why it took me so long. And what's fantastic now is seeing like people who have a public persona speaking out. I think that empowers people to feel more confident. You know, they say if that actress or that like conservationist can speak out on things, I can as well. But I think you've hit a really important point that it's not just about like the medical facts, it's about the experience, and that's a big part of, you know, endometriosis. The pain is something that I think people kind of know is part of it, but the kind of mental and well-being impact is sort of less talked about. I think when it comes to like women and men, there's a lot of inequality that still happens that is kind of not explicit. Just because we get paid the same theoretically now doesn't mean that everything is equal and fine. And you see it a lot with childcare, right? The expectation that mothers, you know, take time off and look after children. And I think reproductive health is a part of that kind of expectation while you're a woman. So you should be able to deal with it because it's part of who you are as a woman. But that's a whole spectrum, you know, and I think it's not fair to say to somebody who never experiences those kind of things that they can have, not an opinion because everyone can have an opinion, but they can have a say over how you interact with the world, what the rules are for you. You only have to look at what's going on in America to see how badly that can turn out. Whilst people encouraged me to look at the support groups, and I did have a look at it, I felt like I couldn't talk about what I was going through because I felt like I'd been so traumatised by the medical appointments I'd had and the way I'd felt dismissed that it would like re-traumatise me to discuss it. And then after I had the laparoscopy, it was like a massive weight because you kind of feel like, oh, I was right. Like all this time I've been telling people this is what's wrong with me, and people are like, yeah, okay, maybe. Now I've got the diagnosis in black and white. It really changed my outlook to the point where I felt like I was able to self-manage from that point on. So laparoscopy, they can kind of cauterise away the endometrial tissue, but it grows back. So it's not a permanent solution, and I think about that a lot, especially because I feel maybe the first year that I had the procedure, the pain was much improved, and then I've noticed over time that it's returned, which is the endometrial tissue coming back. So I often think about, you know, there's a kind of timeline for me in terms of will I have to have another surgery, and then also that you can only have so many surgeries. I think something that I've sort of had people say, well-meaningly, I would say not to be horrible, but they're like, well, if you don't want children, could you not just have a hysterectomy? And they don't mean it in a bad way, but I don't think they see how like that's really difficult for you to have to try and think about that, and there's something like inherently painful about having to give a part of yourself up for a condition that's not your fault and you haven't done anything to kind of make that condition happen. So in terms of the future, I think about these things a lot. I'm always looking at like any new articles or information. And as I've been more open with it over time and more friends and colleagues know, they will send me things, which is really sweet, in terms of new information, but in terms of being realistic, I guess it's about like pain management and about understanding how to best live life with endometriosis rather than letting it determine what I do with my life.